Hello, friends. It's Michaela here. I had to get outside today. There was no doing this inside for sure. So take a deep breath with me because we are here today in this gorgeous sunshine to invite back Corey Hennings of the Sober by Design podcast, who was very recently in episode number 38. So I'm going to pull him in here. I hope everybody can hear me. If not, tell me and I'll go inside. But let's get him in. All right. It's always fun, except maybe, drum roll, please. There he is.
Well, how you doing?
I am good. How are you today?
Good.
Can you hear me
I
okay?
can.
I'm outside in Mother Nature enjoying the heck out of the sunshine. What are you up to today? Tell me something good.
I got to CrossFit this morning, so started my day off
Nice.
working out, which has helped me not be agitated through the rest of my day.
It really does make a difference, right? Like I
It
can
does.
totally tell the days, even when I do everything else right, you know.
Hmm.
And I don't get the exercise in, it's a completely different version of me. And there's science behind that for sure. But at the end of the day, it feels really good to energize your body like that. Why
Uh,
CrossFit for you? Like, what does CrossFit? I'm gonna do this. I'm sorry to block my.
why CrossFit?
Yeah.
So I've tried over my life and when I was younger, I was a competitive swimmer
Hmm.
and was able to just go do things, no problem. A little bit, in my 20s, I was able to go to the gym and just work out. But for me, CrossFit has worked because there's a community aspect to it,
Hmm.
accountability,
Yep.
and really, being driven by other people in the class helps. And then it's
Which
a
is
good way to,
totally in line with everything you talked about in our
yeah,
podcast, right? The
yeah. So,
accountability, the community, the
yeah,
full body benefit. So that makes total sense.
yeah. And it just is like, there's ways to benchmark yourself
Right.
so you kind of can tell, am I getting better? Am I getting worse?
Yeah. And that
Am I
feels
making
good.
progress? Yeah. So it's a good workout overall. So yeah, it's
Have
pretty
you
good.
learned, and maybe I'm like inferring too much, but when we talked a lot about recovery and sobriety. Do you find that having that reward, right? Whether it's like knowing that every day you do the CrossFit thing and there's benchmarks and growth, is that common in recovery to want to keep that consistency and accountability? Would you say?
Yeah. Listen, I can't speak for everybody in recovery, but I think having some sort of consistent routine helps.
Mm-hmm.
Um, again, knowing that you have to show up somewhere to do something helps, right? Like that's the whole, I think, thought process behind an AA.
Right.
You have like, you make coffee or you're the meeting leader or whatever it is, right? Like that is just sort of establishing those sort of foundational things for people.
And
Because
that's
maybe in
important.
our past lives we were a little less reliable.
And that's important, right? Because we want to be accountable to ourselves, but it feels good to contribute to the community. So
Yeah.
I feel like in the podcast, one thing I said we'd come back to that we didn't come back to, I feel like we owe it to the community for you to tell us some of your true crime podcast favorites.
Oh,
Because
geez.
that was
Yeah.
the question we overlooked. Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah. So I think my favorite of all time, and
Hmm.
people might disagree, is S Town. It is by
Oh,
far the best podcast that I've ever listened to.
that was good.
I wish I could somehow go back and listen to that for the
Again
first
this
time.
past year.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Um,
I feel like that whole serial production is just so well done. Like,
it really is.
oh,
It really
okay.
is.
Any other
So,
favorites?
yeah. So I'm also a huge fan of this one on CBC podcast puts it on, and it's hosted by David Ridgen. Very similar sort of production quality to it. Just a great podcast. It's Someone Knows Something,
Hmm.
and they do a lot of cases around missing Indigenous women
Okay.
from Canada, which is a huge problem in Canada and something that I didn't know much about prior to listening to any of those podcasts. But
Right.
again, has that same kind of tenor and tone. And then the other one I really like is I do like um, criminal, just criminal, straight up
Mm,
criminal podcast. I think again has that nice sort of cadence, and it's got a very calm tone to it.
okay.
Doesn't get
I'll
like
have to
too
check that
into
one
the
out.
weeds of like the actual like gore of a crime, right? Like
Right.
I've tried those, and I've listened to a lot of different ones, but S Town, the serial ones to a lesser extent, I like. Someone Knows Something, and then Criminal, I think are all just great in the way that they produce their podcasts, their storytelling, which is just so important too. So
And I think that that's kind of what I was listening to and hearing, like the storytelling aspect of it, to where the listeners involved in, as the information develops and the different perspectives, I think is so important. And when that's applied to the life and the journey that we have, knowing that there's always like steps in different directions, and we constantly have to be like, is this true information? Is
right,
this real? That's why I love that true crime of, just because you found a glove doesn't mean something happened, or that it's
right,
correlated. Um, and I think that, when we look at how we live our lives and the stories that we tell, it's okay to say, we got some bad information, followed the wrong data, and went down a path that was unsavory, unhealthy, non-productive. But it got us to a place where we can now move forward with different information. And I think that's very true in our journeys, whether it's with sobriety or just mental health in general. And then here comes you and your podcast. So tell our audience today, like Sober by Design, what does it do for the listeners, or maybe who are some of the guests that you have? Because I'd love for people to check it out. There's some really great conversations in there.
yeah. I mean, listen, I've had a bunch of different guests. My first guest was my wife. I had to start
Mhm.
out and test the whole thing, right?
Yeah, we talked
Um,
about that in the podcast. Yep.
yeah, seeing like what the equipment was going to do. I've had people on who have just spoken about mental health. I've had on folks who have been in the CrossFit community or the fitness community, and how that might relate back to their sobriety,
Mm-hmm.
and understanding kind of maybe they're starting at a different place in their journey than others.
Yeah.
I've had people who have tackled eating disorders. I've had other people who just, similar to me, just a very typical recovery story. And then ones of people who have spent,
Yeah.
multiple years in prison, based
Right.
on their past behaviors, right? But I think the
Right.
through line is always, I dive in a little bit to their past, and maybe what they were doing when they were using,
Right.
but more so even I go deeper into where they grew up and how they grew up, and try to understand, okay, did something happen along the way that maybe
Mm-hmm.
shifted their life down a path, and then spend very little time on that like using part of their story, and then try to jump into what they're doing today to help themselves and to help others, because most of the people that I've talked to are helping others, just like yourself, right? Like they're in service in some way, and I think that's the more interesting part of everybody's journey. Like, how did they
That's
come
so
out,
important
and
because
that's important.
we could spend our lives in that zone of, I made this mistake, I made this mistake, I went the quote wrong way. Or we could spend our lives talking about what we do next.
Right.
And I tell my kids all the time, like, you're going to make mistakes. Like that's just life.
Yeah.
It's what you do next that really defines where you are. But if we're talking about what you can do next, it tells you that there's always another step, another option, another place to go. So it's remembering that we can take the next step. Maybe it won't be right, quote, wrong, right? But we always have an opportunity to step forward. And if we stay in that awful story we tell ourselves that we're no good, we're not worth it, whatever, we can't move forward. So I love that aspect of your podcast, because you could have a podcast on sobriety and only talk about how awful addiction is, right?
Yeah.
And it is. Let's call that. But you bring people in to tell a story that parts of it will resonate with me, parts of it will not. But who would you say is your target listener? Like, who needs to hear your podcast, to hear these stories of the before and the after?
That's a good question. I actually think anyone along the spectrum could gain something from it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's stories that have been told that I've gained stuff from,
Yep.
with having about 12 years now. I think it's really, really good for people who are in that contemplation stage, right?
Yeah.
So they're not sure if they want to stop, but they kind of think they have a problem, right? And
Hmm.
it's like they're maybe hanging on to that drinking because it's their
Hmm.
identity, or they think it makes
Right.
them better or more personable. But
And we
like,
talked about that in the episode as
yeah,
well, of,
but like,
clearing that out.
that you can start to hear through some of my guests, like, right? Like, yeah, we got rid of that, but now we are, on the other side, and there's something very special that happens for most people.
And
Um,
that's the important part of the story,
yeah,
right?
that
That's,
is,
and
yeah,
it's not the end of the story, right? Because this means life is going on and we get to continue to every day make it some variation of better.
yeah,
Um, so
and
I
it's
think you're right. I think I said in the intro to the podcast, like, for the sober curious and those well on their way, or those not sure where the journey begins, or whatever I
yeah,
said. But this is a story about, you called it out, this is about sobriety or addiction to substances, addiction to sex, to shopping, to drama, to social media, to all of it. Because what you said that stuck with me so much, and it resonates, is if we're looking externally, always, if it's always an external thing to fill an internal need, there's going to be a gap,
yeah,
however you said it. But
yeah,
we need to know that there are stories outside of the one we're telling ourselves today. And I think that's what your podcast does. So I agree. All the humans, right?
yeah, yeah. And
To be those
selfishly for
humans.
me, it was a way, to have a conversation like this once a
Hmm.
week because I enjoy this,
Yeah,
and I've gotten to meet some really cool people along the way. So,
absolutely.
and I know you get the same, right? You get to
Hmm.
have these really
Same.
great conversations with interesting people,
Yep.
um,
It's
and then
really
connect
the
with
best
people.
part. Like, and then to give it away, and then to
Right.
say to people, I have a story for you. Part of it is going to hit. Part of it is like, that's just the human element. We can
Hmm.
connect on so many ways. But if people can grow through your journey, your experience, I want to put a spotlight on that and send it out into the world.
Yeah.
And the more we do that, the more the world gets a little bit brighter, is my
Yeah.
belief.
Yeah.
So,
I actually was talking with your husband yesterday, and he said
yeah,
two birdie shots in one week.
I know. He was telling me he was having lunch with you. And I was like, or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, I'll get to talk to him tomorrow. So
Yeah. No, it's
that's,
great. And
that's the
I
magic of
think
this.
obviously your show is making an impact. I heard your story from your outing on Sunday, so your show is making an impact, which
Oh,
is amazing.
I did. For our listeners, I had my like first kind of celebrity type sighting. A woman that I knew through an organization called Women of Tomorrow, only virtually, like only ever saw faces on a screen. We were at a show on Sunday, and I'm waiting to come back in for the scene to end. And this girl comes up to me and she's like, Michaela. I'm like, in the middle of New York City. I'm like, what? And she's like, Michaela, like, you have the podcast and you've been on Women of Tomorrow. I was like, yes.
That's so good, so
It was
good.
really exciting, and it just affirms, like, we need to keep showing up. The more we keep showing up, the more we will be seen in the world. And if we have this good stuff about hope and resilience and courage and community, let's share it.
Yeah,
There's no reason
that's
to
it.
withhold any of that. So,
Yeah.
Corey, I am grateful, so grateful for the work that you do and so many people to invite others to enhance their journey, to make it safer, stronger, more sustainable, and quite frankly, more joyful. So, friends, follow Corey's podcast. Check him out at Sober by Design. And hopefully, we'll connect again real soon.
Yeah, we're gonna get you on my show,
Oh,
and
that'll
we'll
be great.
figure out the way that I know we'll get a good show out of that too.
Absolutely.
So we got more to
Oh,
talk
I would
about.
love that. I would love that.
Yeah.
So, folks, stay tuned for another episode. But if you haven't yet seen it, go back and watch number 38 of And All the Things on Spotify, Apple, and YouTube. And to everyone out there, make it a great day. Corey, I hope you go enjoy the fabulous sunshine.
Thanks so much, Michaela. We'll talk soon.
I'll talk to you soon.
Bye bye.
Bye.